Hospital morgue. What is the dumbest yet most impressive cause of death you ever came across? My grandfather died when he decided to go and lie down because he wasn't feeling very well. My grandmother asked, should I come with you, to which he responded, go back and eat your food. I am not having a heart attack. He was having a heart attack. I'm not having a heart attack. Man who died of heart attack. Not sure this quite fits with dumbest, but I guess impressive. I saw a guy come in for autopsy in multiple bags, drunk and hit by a train. The impressive part was that somehow they found his intact brain a significant distance away from his other body parts. His skull had come apart in such a way that his brain kept accelerating and flew out and landed on the ground. Local naturopathic doctor took some Chinese herb to cleanse herself for some BS. Put herself in kidney failure. Husband finally calls 911 after she goes unconscious. At the hospital we're able to get her dialysis and bring her back around. Tell her with the right treatment we may be able to restore some kidney function. But if unable to that, she could continue on routine dialysis and hopefully get a kidney transplant. Her response is that she doesn't believe in modern medicine and that it's poison. She left the hospital AMA to go home and treat herself with her own medicine. Her treatment didn't last long, the problem solved itself. Sometimes I see or hear stories of perfectly healthy people killing or injuring themselves in such stupid ways and think of all the kids with cancer or other diseases that will kill them being curable. Life is completely random, it seems. Not either of the OP requests, but I worked in news for 9 years and had some impressive ones. The most messed up was a man who threw himself into the tracks of a local train. The wheel of the train crushed the middle of his body and he was basically certain to die as soon as the train moved, and his injuries were going to pour out all his blood. The poor guy immediately regretted what he'd done, and he was still alive while the train was on him. It was the strangest thing seeing this guy talking to first responders. He must have been in shock but was surprisingly coherent. He basically dictated a suicide note for his wife to police after the EMTs basically told him as soon as the train moved it was going to tear him apart fully and kill him. This man did it in the way an executive might dictate a memo. Very little emotion. I worked in a funeral home for a while. It wasn't exactly an impressive death in the sense it would qualify for a Darwin Award or anything, but there was one guy who was pee drunk after partying in the city. His friends stopped on the side of a major highway for him to puke and he got hit by a taxi. We received his body and he had a perfect impression of a Ford logo along with part of the grill from the taxi that hit him on his upper thigh. Never will forget that. That Ford bit got me laughing. I'm definitely going to heck. My dad used to be the guy who picked up the bodies and took them to the morgue funeral home. His most impressive was this guy who got his steering wheel through his chest. Guy was actually still alive when my dad got to the scene. He was called by a doctor who happened to be stuck in the traffic caused by said wreck, and came to render final aid. It was pure shock that was keeping the guy alive, and the fact that the steering column was holding everything in place. The doctor ended up pulling the guy off of the car, which killed him rather instantly. He hates talking about that story. That's rough right there, knowing that the only way to save someone is to kill them, and having to be the one to do it. My boss was a former cop who responded to a stiff, dead body who sat on a plunger which impaled his intestines and he bled to death. It caused a suction effect and they had to break the toilets to remove him. Guy was in a very expensive suit too. I'll never understand why people are willing to shove random things into their orifices just to avoid a few minutes feeling embarrassed in a sex shop to find out what's safe to use. Unless you're a repeat customer, they're probably not going to remember you and they're not going to shout your name in the grocery store and ask how you like the horse dildo you bought. Not a hospital or morgue worker, but what about the guy who played Gaston at Disney who died from lighting a firework on his head? Absolute tragedy. They said it was a mistake, but... Two kids high on X went to the roof to recreate the Titanic scene where Leo is holding Kate. Both fell to their death. Stupid. They tried to recreate the drowning too. Less the water. Don't work in a hospital, but I'm a cop so I have seen lots of deaths. Let me start by saying that I'm not telling this story to promote or endorse suicide. A few years ago we had a guy jump from one of our parking garages. That happens every now and then. What made it remarkable was how he did it. Witnesses say that he parked his car on the top level, got out and immediately sprinted toward the edge. When he got there, he dove over the wall without ever breaking stride. Most jumpers take a while to do it, but this guy was either dedicated or he knew that he wouldn't do it if he went too slow. Olympic level competitive suicide. About a dozen, give or take, people die each year in Yellowstone due to death by buffalo. When I was there in 2006, I had to stop Japanese tourists from taking a picture with a buffalo. The tourists in Yellowstone are something else. You've got people trying to pet bison, fill geyser water, and feed bears. Luckily, you can avoid most of them by hiking a moderately hard trail. Not a medical worker, in fact infantryman for the US Army. While I was in Iraq, we had been approached by a village leader telling us about a sicko that had been kidnapping their kids and lighting them on fire while he got his jollies. We were told not our AO and to let the police handle it. The police found him tied to a pole with his face burned off. Pretty sure he didn't live. On a bus, a young woman put her head by the windows despite being told repeatedly to not do so. She was hit by a sign and died. Hail Payman. Don't work at hospital morgue but dealt with a lot of successions and reviewed death certificates. The ones that stick in my head are: drowned in Hurricane Katrina. A ride attendant fell in front of a kid's roller coaster and was drugged to death. A guy who was pleasuring himself with a vase up his butt and caused a esophageal reaction and his heart stopped. He was like 25. 19 years old kid in the military was sucked out the back of a transport plane. Official cause of death was a 1,500 foot fall. A guy was assaulted and had major head injury. He survived but had to have a trach tube. He went home in a wheelchair and his family fed him fried chicken and he choked on a chicken bone and his brain was starved for oxygen. He was in a coma for a while and died a few months later. They then went back and charged the guy who assaulted him with murder. They then went back and charged the guy who assaulted him with murder. The frick. Funeral director here. One of the deaths my boss had a few years back. Not really dumb but certainly impressive. A guy who jumped off a building and landed straight on his feet, which caused his legs to literally be pushed through his skull. One of the most common causes of death at the Grand Canyon is the male instinct to urinate from high places. Men camping in the canyon go to pee off the edge of a ledge in the middle of the night, fall off, and die. A noble way to go, to be fair. German backpacker in Australia was doing some work on a farm to make some money. He accidentally stepped on a crop harvester blade, and as he was reaching to free his foot, he cut up his hands. He left the wounds untreated, worked in muddy conditions, swamps, swam in livestock ponds, etc. He had both hands removed, and his foot. The infection tracked to his lungs, and he ultimately died. He had no mates in Australia. Not one person ever visited him. It would have been less stupid if he had been shredded up by the crop harvester, especially considering the farm he worked on had a medical and a veterinary clinic only a few minutes away. That's how my great-grandfather died. He cut his foot while working on the field one day. In summer, he decided to just wash it on the little channels around the fields, just dipping his foot in and go on with the work. He got an infection and was dead in a week. Here is dumbest thing. Dying because you got in a wreck and decided you didn't want to wear a seatbelt. Dumb as crap. I have seen many of those. I read once a comment from a cop that said something like, some people wearing a seatbelt still die, but he never had to scrape the pieces from the pavement with a shovel. An in-law of mine used to be a medical examiner pathologist for the city of Newark, NJ. While there was no shortage of violent death there, the most impressive was when motorcyclists would commit failure to fly off of the NJ Turnpike extension, an elevated roadway over Bayonne and Jersey City. They would take the roadway too fast, not be able to take a curve, strike the edge, and launch themselves into the air, then splat. According to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the secret to flying is to throw yourself at the ground. But miss. I think these motorcyclists are missing that last part. So I am very late, but me parents both work as doctors. My mum was working in A&E, accident and emergency, and basically what happened was that a guy on a motorbike was going too fast and at a stop, couldn't stop. He crashed into the wing mirror of a bus and the mirror took off his head, helmet and all. The worst part of the story is that this flying head flew into a bus stop, The head hit a woman who was waiting there and killed her. Kinda gives new meaning to the term headshot. Usually men don't go to the doctor when things are wrong, but this guy, he got an ear infection, went to the doctor, got a prescription for antibiotics, and then went hunting and decided not to take the antibiotics. Infection spread to his brain and he was in our ICU for a while. He very nearly died several times during his lengthy stay as a result, so I hope it's okay to include this story, but I think he actually survived. You'd look like a proper dingus dying from an untreated ear infection with a big juicy box of amoxicillin in the bathroom cabinet. Best one I've heard. Some guy got admitted to the ER for overdose, was given Narcan, woke up, acted like an butthole and left. 2 hours later he was admitted again but in several pieces. He tried to jaywalk and got hit by 5 cars which literally beheaded him. The hospital, when they hear that that guy was being readmitted, bruh. The hospital seeing him in several pieces, bruh. Patients refusing care out of fear or cultural beliefs. Honestly, on occasion I have run across situations that are depressing, maddening, and impressive, all out of devotion to one tenet of a religion's belief about how far medicine is allowed to go, accepting one treatment but refusing the one they need out of ideology and paying the ultimate price for it. I have a horrible related story. I know someone who bowed to the pressure of her JW church community. She refused a blood transfusion for her newborn. Sadly, the child didn't survive. They became depressed. The weirdest thing, if they are still a believer. I don't know if I could do this if I knew that my little one could have been saved, but it was forbidden, frowned on by our group. Is this where I mentioned that guy who tried to do homemade liposuction with a vacuum cleaner? Pretty sure he just sucked his organs out. Reminds me of an old episode from 1000 Ways to Die. Hello, healthcare worker here. Once had a young man come in non-responsive and with no heart activity. He got shot in the arm with a low caliber handgun. We took over resuscitation efforts from EMS and went on and on, not understanding why we couldn't get his heart to start again. Well, a nurse grabbed his arm to position it better and then she noticed blood on her fingers. So she looked and noticed there was a tiny amount of blood coming from his armpit. The doc ran and grabbed the ultrasound machine. What happened was, the bullet went through the arm, into the armpit, into the axillary vein and got pumped into the right atrium of the heart. I love you. My uncle was an EMT for a period of time. He told me his least favorite story. They got a call about a motorcycle accident. When they got there, the driver of the motorcycle had been going so fast and wiped out so hard that he was nearly liquefied. He remembers having to wash human remains out of his boots. Moral of the story, it's dumb as frick to drive that fast. Apparently the guy had been clocked at well over 100 miles per hour and was trying to outrun a cop. My co-worker told me a story from his time in as a firefighter, where he had to wash down a human pizza from a tunnel roof. A motorcyclist had been going too fast in a tunnel, hit a rock and got flung up into the roof. My co-worker is not a firefighter anymore. He quit a bit after that episode. I don't work in a morgue or hospital, but my brother works in a morgue. He told me this story of a man who died from choking after trying to swallow a watermelon whole. The man got it a quarter of a way before choking. Guy fell 7 stories out of a window, broke every bone in his body, and survived. Later died in the hospital due to internal injuries. Source: former EMT. This question reminded me of news item a couple weeks ago. 30 years back, in Belgium, a Russian fighter plane did crash on a house. The young man living in the house did die, but the fighter pilot escaped from the plane via his ejection seat a long time before. He was having problems with the engine and thought the plane would quickly crash in the ocean or in a field. It didn't. The motor started working again and the plane flew on automatic pilot to Belgium, into the house. An extreme case of wrong place, wrong time, sadly. Young trucker driving a big rig was texting and driving, drifted into oncoming lane and hit another big rig head on. His balls were completely exploded and pelvis femurs shattered from the wheel. Feet totally intact but hanging on by a thread. Expensive steel toes did their job. Preteen girl took part in a choking game contest and won. Guy reversed a big cat down an elevator shaft on a building being constructed. Wasn't killed by the fall but from the way he was crushed he slowly suffocated. Older. Seasoned truck driver of many decades was driving his personal vehicle on a rare day off and was T-boned and killed by a rookie truck driver. Woman had morning sex on Valentine's Day with a bad heart. Opened the bag and the only thing she had on was a huge grin. Bombing victim. Wrong place, wrong time. Guy boat racing gets flung during crash. Half decapitated by the wooden racing boat rotor on the competitor's boat in front of him. Are these even interesting? After seeing Working with thousands of deaths, I don't even know how to answer this question. Also, what makes a death impressive? Staggering odds. Getting flung out of a high-performance drag race boat. It happens. The first thing you hit on the way down being a propeller. Impressive. My husband was like 13 years old and found a missing summer camp employee. He'd had a heart attack and fallen onto a sauna heater. He was stuck to it. Why they let kids join the search I don't know. My dad died from an infected boil on his ass. 4 months ago. He had a boil on his bum and never saw a doctor. It got infected. He gets sepsis. Says he's feeling unwell. Takes a week off work. Day he died. He's lying in bed. Gets up to go to toilet. Passes out. Has a heart attack. Hits his head on the way down and ends up brain dead. Men, don't be stupid. See a doc. I'm sorry for your loss. Neither working in a hospital nor at a morgue. I'm a caregiver in a nursing home. We have enforced doors that are hard to open without knowing how. Pull, unlock, push. Somehow, a wheelchair user with dementia managed to open one of them and yeeted herself down the staircase. 2nd floor. Somehow she survived that. Granted, she looked like she just lost her boxing match to Muhammad Ali. Here's the twist. When she came back from the hospital, she went to eat something, took a piece of sausage, didn't chew and suffocated cause of it. Yeeted herself down the staircase. I'm going to heck for laughing at that. I had a friend who was a medical coroner for a major city for a few years. Told me about a lot of deaths occurring from autoerotic asphyxiation in the late 1990s. Most were either by strangulation or suffocation by plastic bag, but there were an increasing number by modified used medical respirators. They were all modified in the same way, which led a lot of investigators to believe a single person or small company was selling them via underground connections. Fireworks were illegal in his state, but people got a hold of them anyway, and he had a few cases of the remnants of young males had tried to make their own or modify existing ones only to meet their demise in explosive ways. Surprisingly, the cause of death was rarely burns, but impacts and shrapnel. One group of 4 died in an explosion in a garage when illegal fireworks were smuggled in via a hollowed out car fender. No one is sure how it exploded, but 3 children died while in the car from the shockwave, followed by parts of the car's engine becoming one with their corpses. A bit late, so this will get lost, but 2 come to mind, both suicides, both army. One was a dude in my husband's company. He tied 550 cord around his neck and around the doorknob to his barracks room and sat down. Roommate got a week off for coming back to that. The second was recently. A guy stepped on an IED in Afghanistan, blew up his legs, also his dong. He was a single dude, young, no close family, so while he was in the hospital in Afghanistan, waiting to be sent back stateside, he pulled out his IV from his arm, stuck the needle in his neck, and bled out. Anal bleeding from anal penetration. They consented midway when their partner asked if he should stop. Saw blood. They said no and that they liked the pain. This was all in a one-night stand. Remember kids, use lots of lube and prep as much as you can. I grew up in a funeral home during the 70s. CB radios were real popular and folks were installing large antennas for their home base units. One guy decided to install a mast antenna on his roof by himself. Apparently lost his grip and the antenna hit a high power line. Instantly fried this guy. When we got him from the morgue, his sneakers were still melted on his feet. He was buried with them on. Okay, obligatory, not a hospital or morgue worker, was not even a witness, but do have some relevant tales. So here you go. Don't be scared by the wall of text. It's not one long story, it's 3 brief ones. In spouse's hometown, I think 2 or 3 decades ago, was a death so absurd it is still talked about. Railway crossing on a highway was poorly paved. super bumpy to drive over. Town worker was transporting a manhole cover in the back of a pickup truck. Didn't tie it down because that crap's too heavy to blow away, right? But by some fluke, the way he hit those rails at 110 kph and the resulting bounce of the truck, the manhole cover flew up in the air with tremendous force. It had enough momentum to smash through the side of the school bus passing the opposite direction, giving a child a fatal injury. So always tie down your load. Since I'm at it, I can give you some told to me on industrial construction gigs. Though thank goodness I never witnessed a work fatality personally. Good buddy of mine once was up a few stories high in a refinery. Open catwalks so you can see everywhere. He saw a pair of young apprentices at his height on a nearby structure, pretending to have a sword fight with these knives used to cut hard insulation, kinda like a steak knife but twice as big. Both kids lunged forward at the same time, and one kid's chest made friends with the other kid's knife. Stabbed kid started to run for the stairs, like he figured if he got to the office and got first aid he'd be okay, I guess. But his heart must have been stabbed because he went white and collapsed dead just a couple steps into his flight. To my buddy, near enough to see his eyes, but in reality a 10-minute run away, due to the structures not being connected. Felt so helpless. I'm sure the kid who didn't die strongly wished to trade places with the one who did. Another case of two young apprentices frolicking. Dude got a jug of water poured on him. He found a room that was very warm with strong airflow, perfect for drying off, except it was part of, if I recall correctly, the cooling system in a power plant. When a certain process kicked out, it was hot like a sauna and breezy like a strong natural wind. But when the process kicked in, it was a lot hotter and the airflow a lot stronger, and it automatically locked to prevent anyone entering during the dangerous phase. Since dude was in there already, that safety feature trapped him. Nobody knew where he was, but they figured maybe he went home since he had gotten all wet. They found him the next day mummified. Lessons to be learned. The boss doesn't ban horseplay just to spoil your fun. Horseplay brings needless risks. Don't do it. And never frick with equipment you don't fully understand. And always tell someone where you are going. My great-grandfather didn't wanted both of his testicles removed due to testicular cancer, so he said to his doctor, leave one in so my wife has still something to play. He died soon after because of this. When I was age 18 to 20, I did body removals for funeral homes. The looks people gave seeing a young woman riding shotgun in a hearse were hilarious. So were the ones throwing the evil eye our way. Anyways, we go to one of the local ERs to pick up a gentleman who was killed in a terrible accident. He had gone alone to some nearby property he owned to do some maintenance on some of the trees. He was on a ladder fairly high up, using a chainsaw. The chainsaw hit a knot in the tree, causing the chainsaw to kick back. He must have been cutting above his head, because when the saw kicked, it ended up swinging out and back, hitting him in the back of his head, shattering his skull in that spot, and damaging his brain with both the saw and bone. He fell out of the tree. After all that, he was still alive. He died from blood loss. One of his sons found him after the man didn't come home and that son went looking for his dad. My neighbor does things like this. Took a chainsaw 20 featuring up a tree on an extension ladder leaning up against it to trim branches. Did it again when a birdhouse up they had a beehive grow in it. Used his power tools again, way up trees, on extension cords in the rain. I dread the day we come home and see him lying in bloody pieces in the front yard. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.